Great, let's go live. So today I want to focus on the Bootstrap piece right here in Unit 3. And maybe there's a few things too I could do to adjust this, the resolution. But really, I'm just going to build this for perfect projection on YouTube, and that's what I'm going to do. So where you're at right now is you have a lot of JSON under your belt, and I hope that's making sense. And I recommend that you try this code 4 times to Sunday, so that you're trying, reiterating, repeating. I think coding and martial arts and learning the piano have a ton in common in that repetition is your secret, and relatively medium grade IQ people can do well if they are repeating and they're trying things over and over again. And I have a sense that you all are not medium grade people. By definition, you've chosen something that requires a high IQ element, but that doesn't disobligate you from trying things, from really experimenting and seeing what happens if, and trying to break things and then trying different things. And that's a very experimenter's mindset. But what I want to talk, so that should apply to your JSON. But what I really want to talk about today is I want to talk about the Bootstrap element. And the first thing I want to go over is just basic JavaScript, basic HTML. Let me pump this up a little bit so it's nice and big. Where I've gone is I've grabbed this sample using JS DOM nodes.html, and I've gone in there within the Unit 3. And some of this is going to look familiar based upon what we did yesterday, but in reality it doesn't involve any JSON. And the only thing it's really doing is it's using a for loop within JavaScript in order to create elements on the page. So those are the only things it has in common with the last time that we talked. So the net impact of the page running this way is that, and this is running from my local machine, is that you've got these divs that are repeating. And so if you take a look inside of the HTML and then you highlight certain things, this is a big div right here. And inside of that div, it has 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. And that gets you used to the idea of paragraphs. And also these paragraphs have IDs. So technically, JavaScript could manipulate the contents of those paragraphs. And that should probably feel pretty familiar at this point. And we have a div that's up there. It's called the first div. And that's set within the ID parameter. So that means that both the div and these paragraphs can be controlled programmatically from JavaScript as well as the body. So JavaScript can take responsibility for the content of those HTML elements because of that ID there. And that's just building upon the stuff that you already know. That's just reiterating, what you already know. Now, there are some interesting new things that begin to take place here. If I kind of click on this, this line, now we begin to work with data dynamically below. And I want to kind of bring the JavaScript to your attention. Now, right here, there's a comment. And comments in HTML, we don't want them to get out to the consumer, right? But they work with the same philosophy as comments inside of your Java, where if you read a comment, you feel like you understand what the programmer was trying to do. So comments are a very professional way of communicating between developers, not so much with the public who don't really know they're there. And their web page gets clogged with comments. So we want to cleanse the site of comments before we release it to the public. But if we're programmatically generating comments, that could be really interesting for the development phase when things are complex and we want to explain our work. I have a really brilliant set of students that I get to work with on my off days, and they're building up all sorts of web and mobile products, and they have to work as a team, and so that group would probably benefit from sending each other, like putting little comments in their work. But so I want to bring attention to that comment, and you realize that the comment is kind of custom built. So each of these comments, there's a whole lot of more comments here than any person would want to write. So obviously they're machine-driven comments. JavaScript is automatically generating these comments. And also the name of the div, the div ID of that is div1, and the div ID of this is div2. The IDs of those divs are also captured within the comments. So this is a little bit more athletic than maybe what we should do in real life, but it shows two things. One, in that we can automatically generate comments, and those comments are HTML, and they're being added to the page dynamically. That's fine. But if you get down to it, you're like, wait a sec here. This whole darn page was generated automatically. JavaScript was busy coding this thing for you guys. Not for you guys, but for the customer automatically. You guys weren't doing that work. You're actually instructing JavaScript to do that work and filling up these divs. The div is kind of invisible to the naked eye. You guys can see the divs because you're on Web Inspector. So that's a div that's happening right there. And let's look at the computed the box model of this should show up in a sec. And it's not, so I'm not going to push it. Yeah, here we go. So that's the box model of that div. But to the naked eye, you can't really see that div. It's just to the web developer who investigates the information architecture of the page and reveals the div. But what is visible to the public is the content, the images and text and embedded elements and other cool animations that take place within the div. So structurally, JavaScript is automatically creating a structure, and then it's automatically populating that structure with data or comment or content. So that lends itself to the script that I want to go into over here, where it's a little bit more visible. So that's the JS DOM nodes. Now, DOM is the document object model. That's an acronym, document object model. You already are good with the document object model because you're using terms like document. And naturally, because we have a body and we have an end body, those are important elements of the document object model. And really, it's just a hierarchy that allows the JavaScript programmer to touch upon different HTML elements within the page. Now, some of you are big Google Docs users, and Google Docs is just a very steroidal version of the DOM, where those Google people are literally treating the web page like a piece of deep software, and they're using the DOM to kind of inject interesting visual elements that help you to compose, documents and spreadsheets, and it's a very impressive use of the DOM if you think about it. So the other element that you need to know about the DOM is made of nodes, and nodes are just little divs and little things that we can attach to the body to make the page bigger. A node is kind of like, really node comes from, math and topology. I hate to, quote topology, but, topology is really where mathematicians estimate the efficiency of getting between 2 points because there are different nodes or different hops that, a truck can take as it travels through cities, or a packet can take as it travels through the internet. So this idea of nodes are really just, they're really just pieces that fit together to form a larger chain of things. And as you move from node to node, you're traveling along a route. So a mapping application likes to see a city as a series of nodes that are comprised by where streets touch upon each other. So street crossings are nodes within mapping apps, and elements like div are nodes within the HTML DOM. And I don't want to go over that too quickly and just kind of boom, throw that at you. But what you're doing here is whenever you create an element, as you did Tuesday, or whenever you did, looking at the JavaScript, when you create an element, you're adding a node to the DOM. And that means you're adding something to the body of the page programmatically or via JavaScript. So that's kind of where the title of this comes from, because I'm a teacher, I love to explain stuff. You're smart, you can probably get it, no problem, just as long as I tell you, right? So what happens here, the first thing I do within my JavaScript and this is it's hard to see, but the first move is to create a paragraph and then to populate that paragraph with a text node, which lays down some textual data. Too bad you can't just write it straight to the paragraph. You actually need to add the text node. And then you're going to attach the text node to the paragraph using the append child. So it adds a node to it. And then you're going to grab a div that's already out there, i.e. first div, and then you're going to append that completed paragraph to the first div. And that's what gives us this impact right here, where we have that text added. I forget what content we added. We see this is new, and we add this is new to that existing first div. So that kind of gives you the concept of how we create a node in JavaScript, then we append it to the page. And if that's okay by you, you're doing really good. Because the way I see the web is a big collection of data, but there's always these rows that we're dealing with. You know, those of us in CIS, oh, you can see what kind of things I find interesting. Oh, let's look at a gigantic water cistern. Oh, okay, I got to update my payment. Okay, great. Huh. I just received all my stuff like overnight. Okay. But yeah, this is the kind of stuff I like to think about, which is like a gigantic water cistern. Look at that. You like that? You want to come over to my house and look at my water cistern? It's a gigantic, it looks like I'm living in Middle Earth. But look, I get the water out of the bottom of it. See? And that's like really, there's a lot of water that fits in that, right? What, you don't think that's cool? I think that's cool. And I think I could probably lift it into place using like a crane, using that little cleat in the end. So that's what I get into. So let me just say that, you know, there are a lot of water cisterns out there. See, look, I got a barrel. That's just not dad enough. Look at that.
That's very dad.
Does that say dad to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Probably, yeah, that's just dad's water barrel. Like, no one knows what's in it. No one knows what it's for. All they know is there's a spigot and it's attached to the rainwater. Okay? That's all you need to know. That's all you get told. It's on a need-to-know basis. So all I can see here is I see these rows and rows and rows of data, and that means that, oh, I got this rain gallon wizard. Well, maybe I need to buy something else. So this is a huge element to online commerce. It's the recommendation engine is giving you sort of an analytic-based suggestion on what else you should look at. But I think what I really want to say, and I don't know why I'm humiliated by Amazon in the middle. I mean, come on, Amazon, give me a break. Like, you just sent me my goods. Why do you need to bug me on the internet? So let's go cistern, and let's see all the cisterns. You can get a tax deduction, by the way, for a cistern that you dig in the bottom of your backyard. So these are all cisterns. Whoa, look at that. That looks awesome. So, yeah, that's what I want right there. That looks so inhospitable. But that's for harvesting rainwater. That's mega beyond cool. But you realize that this is how we're shopping these days, is we're looking at these large lists and we're kind of exploring the world of retail through these big, long, cascading lists. So when you see these very simplistic renditions, I'm really just warming up to something more intimidating like this, where instead of, this is like a link, but I can add a link to my DOM. This is just an animation, but I can add that animation to my DOM. This is just an image, but I can add that image to the DOM. And you know well, because you're all smart, that these are just divs. So if I can load up my JavaScript to produce all sorts of cool divs on my page, and then I can talk to that div. I think the div has an ID. Does it have an ID? And I can talk to that div and then I can populate that div. Look at it. Look at all the nodes that are added there. And that's how I get to my image. If I can get my JavaScript to add lots of divs and then fill up those divs with the data that I'm interested in and then add interactivity to those elements, boom, I'm developing a web. I'm on my way to wealth creation. So this is an important stepping stone in understanding how that happens. So I want the ability to create a div. I want that div to have an encoding with the ID. And then I want to put some content into that div. So onward. Now, you guys know from your initial programming class that the for loop kind of separates the programmers. There's the programmers, there's the programming students who are comfortable with the for loop, and there are those who don't want the for loop to be there, just want the for loop to disappear. Frankly, the for loop is just something that you need to memorize. There's a starting point, there's an ending point, and there's the incremental traverse of that data set. And you don't need to just go I++. You go I minus or I plus 5 or I plus 2. That just tells you how quickly you want to move through that range. And it roughly maps to the calculus sigma, where we take a data set and we do the same thing on every element of that data set. So really for, I don't know, how long has the sigma been within calculus? Calculus is, late 1500s. So by 1968, roughly we had good for loops. And so, I would say earlier than that. Let's say by World War II, we were parsing large volumes of data programmatically. So let's say by 1942, we had good large array traversal, as the DoD rolled out a computer to help manage, all of its moving parts. And, did humanity wait 400, close to 450 years to get a sigma to work? And that's probably true. And we didn't start to get sigma until we got fors. So what we're saying here is the index, I'm not going to explain this in depth, but the index begins at 0. And we said, well, look, if your index is in fact 0, create a paragraph, and then print, now we begin to work with data dynamically, right here. And then go ahead and append that announcement, and then paste it into the first div, and then put a comment in there. And so create a comment based upon this. And I know this sounds geeky, but I'm going to move on in a sec. There's a little bit of commenting that we execute there, the end announcement part. And really, I use the comment as a way to kind of warm up to the fact that I can create new nodes and then put it into the DOM somewhere. So then I say, okay, make a comment message, and then say begin div plus I. And I goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 14, or however long this is, 14. And so you see a little ID, begin div 0, begin div 1, begin div 2, right? So those map to the for loop. And the O and the 1, I get those from the index. And that's just for loop talk. So I increment the ID number, and then I create a div, and then I put this phrase my data is saying, and then I put in the value of I. So that's my JavaScript beginning to make statements on its own as big volumes of data begin to roll in. And where you guys are at, which I'm really excited about, is that you're learning how to process big arrays of data by practicing on a little data set. It's big enough so that you can understand the impact of 3 rows of data. Now this is 15 rows of data, and let me just say after the first 2 or 3 rows, you guys kind of get the idea. You kind of see that it's working. And so I think what I want to encourage you as programmers, coming of age, in the digital age is get good at for loops. If you can just discipline yourself to see all problems in terms of for loops, you're going to be a success with algorithms, where we say, look, do the same thing to every item within a data set and give us a result, and then move on to the next one. And then can we tabulate or do statistics based on that aggregative behavior? Yeah, that's perfect. But here, the example is we're just creating a child, creating a node, and then we're appending it. The other thing that I want to say is, if I have a div, and I have a div here called dynamic div, and I'm creating all sorts of divs dynamically, I call it dynamic div, I can actually set an attribute of it. So I set the ID to something, and so the ID of each of these divs gets set dynamically. And that just means that as I parse this array of data, I can touch back upon that div if I want to. But probably what you need to know right here is we're going to set attribute. Now ID is the HTML element that I'm setting. And as we move forward into today's examples, we're going to work with the class. So I can set the ID of something, and I can also set the CSS class of something. So I can style the element as I create it using the set attribute. And so you guys are going to do well as you integrate Bootstrap. So let me get that out there. Set attribute is important. That's new. Create element, that's important. And then append child, that's kind of the heart of it. And then as you integrate that to a for loop, that means that you can create a lot of elements. Then you can make them appear on the page using append child. And then you can, and I want to highlight it, then you can set the attributes of them so you style them as you create them. So you're saying to yourself, wait a second, my JavaScript just produced the web page automatically based upon its own decisions. That's kind of powerful. And that's where the web dev community is right now, is the web page is making decisions to show things based upon the incoming data. And so what's happening is we're using JSON more and more to dynamically affect the outcome of the page. So as you go into programming interviews, talk a lot about JSON. Just use JSON in a sentence every half minute. And someone will be like, wow, this person really likes to think about JSON. And it's true. Couldn't we send two payloads? I mean, we could probably send the information, right, the cistern information, the details about the cistern. But could I also send other JSON that could affect what I see right here in this side of the page? Maybe I could send a JSON that would affect the number of menus that get created here. You know, and that's probably what Amazon is doing, because they know that they sense that I probably have a backyard, or at least I have a small terrace at my house. And because of the cistern, they say, well, you have a cistern, so you probably want patio furniture. And you have this rain barrel, so you probably also want to work on your hedges. Does that make sense? And they kind of made a machine learning guess as to what other stuff I might be in the market for. This little suggestive recommendation engine is why big boxes like Target, Sears, Kmart, why they're having difficulty right now. Is you're all smart people, and you're like, wow, I just bought a cistern. Maybe I had to buy a sauna. Can I fuel my hot tub or my swimming pool with my rain barrel? Ooh, now I'm thinking. Now we're cooking with gas. And see, that's why you want to have like a 400-gallon, 300-gallon cistern in your backyard to populate your hot tub. Okay, now you learned. Okay, you're welcome.
You have one of those?
These, you know, I literally paid for it, and they emailed me about an hour later saying that no one's ordered one in like 10 years, and they didn't have any in stock. They weren't even making them. They're so sorry. And I was like, are you kidding? I'm bringing back. This looks like something. I literally wanted my 6-year-olds to say, this is Winnie the Pooh's honey pot. And let's go get some honey from the honey pot. I just loved it. I just knew it would be Fantasyland. But obviously it wasn't meant to be. I'm sorry, good ideas. You really did have a good idea here, but you should probably manufacture one or two. Because after this video, everybody's going to be ordering it. Look at that. See the terracotta? That's awesome. Californians, take note. This is for the Arizona people. California, Arizona. So I think you can see why these very open source skills are going to feed in. So let's close that down. So let's move forward a little bit here. These are some of the examples that I'm working with. And what I'm building them with is Bootstrap, naturally. And you all are studying responsive design. Bootstrap is a big part of that. And so I wanted to go over the way that divs are used inside of Bootstrap. So if you want to go over to the getbootstrap.com examples/grid, here, let me just rewind a little bit. This grid page right here is super useful to us. So here's the way this works. In Bootstrap, you have what's called a grid system. So in any given page is worth 12 units. It's 12 units wide. Now, within that, you can have any collection of columns until the total width reaches 12. So you can have 4 3-unit columns, or what's very popular is 3 4-unit columns, or you can have a 6 in conjunction with a 3 and another 3, or you can have a big 8. You can have a big 8-unit column, right? And then you can have a little baby bear column right next to it, and you can populate that with any number of content, and then you can create some irregularity. So once you understand that, then you say, well, great, that means I can create a very nicely organized page. So let's use this hello world page. It looks great, right? This is what any page on earth looks this way. And what I want to do is, why don't we fill up these divs with our messaging? Like, our product is great. Our people are nice. You want this product so badly. Like, you want to communicate in divs. But as I select each one, you can see that this is a column of length 4 that fits within a row that fits within a container div. So it's one div after another. One div inside of another div. And the styling of MD4 falls within a row, and a row has a certain degree of padding and justification from the left and right. And then it fits within a container. And so for every row, I can create all these cool columns. So as you look at my thing right here, my the stuff we just looked at here, it's really missing the cool columns that are otherwise here. So let's talk about how we use that. And I think you're probably grasping this pretty quick after you see how it works. It doesn't surprise me that I can be like, okay, let's inspect the element, and I can say, okay, this is how this fits. That's this div, and it has all sorts of encoding. And here's this div right here. And basically, if you just go div class, quote, column XS, 6, SM6, LG8, XS12, you'll get this div. And that's something you're probably grasping at this point, and you're just fine to check that out. And of course, we'll review that once you ask for these properties, this is the CSS that's loading behind it. I must say, divs are probably the best way to learn CSS, because whenever you make a div, there's all sorts of styling that gets embedded, and you can see all the properties that pertain to this div. It has a left color, it has a background color, a bottom color, it's just floats to the left, has a font that it uses inside of there, it has some padding. Everything that you see within this graphic right here. So I know I'm moving fast, but I've told you what you need to know right now, because as we wrap through, this is a very simple example. And as you inspect the content here, you'll see that you have what's called a Jumbotron at the top, and you're going to love Jumbotron. Jumbotron is like, you have one opportunity within your website to make a big splash. It's called the Jumbotron, and within that you have like a 48 font text, 48 point text, you might have like, this is what we want you to see. Like, this is the big chance that we have to make an impression. Like, we have one opportunity to hit a home run with you guys, and so we want to do it on the Jumbotron. That's the Jumbotron. Now, immediately under the Jumbotron, we have the containers where we have these columns, and they're all within a row. And then I move, these are the ones that I hand-coded. You can see that because the variables are nil. There's no variables associated. And then these are the columns here that were generated automatically via JavaScript. So these ones are filling up based upon my JSON parse. So let's go over and take a look at that source code. Now the first one I use for looping. So I begin with my employees array, such as you had last class. Do a JSON parse, fill up the data. This variable could be whatever you want to call it. But employees, you need to use the employees because the employees refers to the array. And so we're outputting it here. But what we're doing here that's a little different is we're saying in your for each, and you've coded this already, is we'll go ahead and we'll log the contents of that to the console. But then we want to create the div, such as you did last time. Then we're going to create a paragraph. Then we create a text node. And then we're going to append the text node to the paragraph. And then we're going to append the paragraph to the div. And then just as we did in the JSON nodes example, the DOM nodes example, we're going to set the attribute of the class to a Bootstrap column. So that column will fit itself nicely within the width of the page. And then we're going to append that fully completed dynamic div to the body. And that's what we're doing right here. And you can play this YouTube a couple times. I know this is happening fast, and really it's very simple. What we're doing is we're just setting the attribute of its class to this column. So we grab those properties from Bootstrap and apply it to the new divs as they're created. And I think what bears repeating is that as you do a for each, it's like a for loop. So we're doing the same thing to every row of that data. And you guys have made like a formula, like a recipe that you want to apply for each of these rows. And as you grab new rows off the top of your JSON array, you're applying this recipe to each row of data. And that, to me, I think makes a lot of sense as we look at, the Amazons of the world, the e-commerce, elements of the world. Let's look at today's deals. Yep, where we have different data, but every row has the same kind of recipe applied. We've got a thumbnail, some kind of status, its price, the discounting, deal completion. We have a promotion, and we have customer reviews, and then buy it, right? And that recipe is repeating as we move between these elements. So liver support receives the same treatment as Brazilian orange right here. Wonderful. So I can see my laptop is beginning to complain a little bit about power. So I really only have a few more words that I want to say. In that, I want to grab the row here. As you go through your data, how many rows do you see right there? You see 3 rows, right? Now, what if you could only fit 2 rows per row in Bootstrap? It means that you could only fit these 2 rows from your JSON within 1 row of HTML, right? Like in Amazon, how many items can we fit per row? Well, it looks like they're doing 3 right here. because they want to keep the image nice and big, and fresh. The image is what is selling you. So because our data has an irregular number, we want to put these two within their own row, and then we want this to find its own unique row. So what I'm going to do is, as I move through the for each, I'm going to change the way that for each is coded so that it has the item, as you're aware, then it has the index and the array available to us. And as the index changes, we want to divide that by 2. So naturally, 3 divided by 2 is an irregular, non-integer number. And so if the index divided by 2 has a remainder of 0, that's the modulus, remember that from beginning? If we have a remainder of 0, go ahead and create a new row. And then create new divs within that row. Otherwise, just create a new div. And what we end up getting out of that, let's pump that up a little bit, is for the 3 rows of data, you have your first column, you have your second column, that's 1 row. And then after that row is finished, you have your third item that's sitting down there. So what my more sophisticated example is doing is it's actually becoming aware of the need to skip a row based upon the number of elements within your JSON. And what we want to say within your coding that you're going to do this week is we want you to apply these techniques. So be sure to play this video a couple times. Doesn't need to be very long, and then read the assignment over a little bit, check out what we're asking you to do, and fool around with things. Have questions, try to answer questions, and always work on small questions. Don't work on big questions. Don't be too macho. Enjoy just working out one question at a time. Does that make sense?